Mr. David Granger, my colleague, friend, and brother, and the next president of Guyana, members of the head table, including the sister of the leader of the Alliance for Change, representing our dear brother Kemraj Ramjatan, and the commander-in-chief of the AFC in the Queens area, Asha Balbachan, Freddie Shipback, campaign manager, co-campaign manager, Joseph Harmon, I want to recognize the Colin Moore, and before I say anything further, I want to just say that Colin and I, we've gone back a long way from our life in the same village. They were, of course, living in Lancaster, but there's a very curious incident in my life involving, I don't know for sure, Colin, if it's your mother or your aunt, Moore, teacher Moore, who took me, mother, yes, wonderful lady, took me to school the first day in primary school. And the curious thing about that was that I went to school shock-tail. I was so eager to get into school that it didn't matter if I wore a pants that day. In those days, you walked through the brown, dusty road and you kicked the dust, and there's almost dust right up to where it needed to be covered. So I was fully covered. So that, in a sense, there's so much that we have in who we are and what we may become to the origins of our families and our relationship. And saying that, I am Moses, because when I was delivered from the womb of my mom, there, Auntie Chuno, Nurse Michelle, Afro-Guyanese midwife, she named me Moses. And that is how I got that name, Moses. And so, what I'm going to say to you today has a lot to do with my own origin. That is, I came out of an environment where we didn't know differences in ethnicities. We were cradled by Afro-Guyanese. We were taught by Afro-Guyanese. We were inducted into moral and spiritual values. In my case, when I went to the Lutheran church, by Afro-Guyanese. And so our life, our origin, didn't give us much of a choice. And it is one of those moments of our life that I remember seeing David Granger. He wasn't short-tailed, he was in short pants. Standing at a lamppost at the head of Wim Village, and we spoke fleetingly. I don't know if David ever remembered that, but I remember his father being a policeman at the Wim police station, and we were attending the same school, Auckland school, but not in the same class. I think I was a little brighter, I was. Yeah, it's true, because I had accelerated promotion. 1 week I spent in Little Infant, and I didn't go to Big Infant, that's what they call it. And before you know, I skipped Form 2, Standard 2, I skipped Standard 3, and I was in Standard 5. So by the time I got the school leaving, I had to borrow my brother's certificate, birth certificate, to write the thing, and that's how my name was in the beginning, not Moses Nagamootoo or Virasami Nagamootoo. I was Nagapel Nagamootoo. And so but when, the story gets more interesting than that, because when I went to school the first day, my sister's name, my eldest sister's name was Mari, my father was Mutu, and there was a boy sitting near to me whose name was Lakshmanan. And when the teacher Baba shouted for us to say our names, this boy said Lakshmanan, and I shouted almost simultaneously. Mutu. And so she gave me my name, Lachmanen Marimutu. Today, those people who do not see that we need to go forward in Guyana, perhaps wrongly so or rightly so, they have now changed my name from Nagamootoo to Nagamootoo. But that's all right. That's all right. The transmutation of name perhaps is appropriate when we are trying to take our country forward and to build the foundations for national and ethnic unity. It is perhaps what we want to do, to give up a little of ourselves, to give up a little of what we think we are, and how valuable we think what we are is to ourselves, and to transmute ourselves into a Guyanese personality. We have to give up a little bit of who we think we are, if we want to know this. And so, many people have asked, and I want to keep this as simple as possible, why did I make the decision to join David Granger? It's not that we share the same school or we share the same village. And of course, I was surprised when a relative died. I went to the funeral of Sister Julie. And there it was, I saw David Granger for the first time in many, many years at the funeral parlor at the head of Camp Street. And he was speaking on behalf of the Peters family, representing as the big brother of the family, because the big brother, Frankie, had died, and the other brother, Bio Peters, is somewhere in Canada, couldn't come to the funeral. And then I realized that Julie and Marge lived in our house. And they sold fish with my mother, with Wim Market and all the markets. And Peters, John Peters, had a fishing boat. And he and my father worked the sea together. He inducted my father in fishing. They became great friends. And John Peters, Patrick John Peters, was the first Dravidian. He never called himself an African or a black man, but he was very black. Perhaps 1 minute after midnight. But he played the tapu at the Kali Puja, and he spoke fluent Telugu and Tamil. So I grew up in that environment, and then in that environment came David Granger. And then I realized that our path and our destiny might have been set many years before. So that's from that basis that people ask me question, why did you join up with David Granger? And perhaps I do not have the definitive answer. Perhaps the necessity of my country requires that this should be done, because I have joined politics at the age of 14 in 1961. And I've always been searching for something, perhaps searching for myself. Because we all, in a way, suffered from an identity problem. And you have to forgive me that when I went to India, I was offered an award, and I was asked to make a few remarks. And when I spoke, some of my friends in Guyana, back home, were annoyed that I said I was not an Indian. I had said that I am from a country far away called Guyana. I have Indianness in me because of my ancestors. But if I had been born in Pakistan looking the same way I look, I would have been a Pakistani. If I had been in Trinidad, I would have been a Trini. If I had been born in Jamaica, I'd be a Jamaican. If I'd been born in any other country, I would have been carrying the nationality of that country. I wasn't born in India. I was born in Guyana. I am a proud Guyanese. And that is the path we need to take of examining ourselves, because once I had a drink with Martin Carter, the national poet of Guyana, and while we were drinking, I asked him a question. I was a reporter for the Mirror newspaper. I asked him a question: how did you become a poet? And he said that was a stupid question, and he was going to give me a stupid answer. And he said that when he was in jail by the British at Kingston Airport then, he was placed in a cell, and that he realized that in the cell he couldn't walk forward. They were the prison bars. And he said he decided that the only thing he could do in the cell is to walk backwards. And he said in walking backwards, he stepped into himself. Because there was a point where he couldn't go any further. And he discovered a poet. And it was that time that he wrote the poem, "This is the dark time, my love. All around brown beetles crawl, watching you sleep and aiming at your dreams." We have returned to the 1950s, where now brown beetles crawl in our country. A young man, Carter had said that he was giving his shirt as a banner for the revolution against the British. And a young man came forward, and he had a bullhorn, and he was calling on people to vote Courtney Come Ewing. He was calling for what any decent democratic country would tolerate. That is the right to dissent, the right to protest, the right to have your voice. And he was shot thrice at the back of his head. We realize that Martin Carter didn't leave us only a shirt to be the banner of the revolution. He has left us now, like Courtney, a bullhorn, which is a powerful, more powerful weapon, because from now on, we believe that if we are to transcend the darkness in our society, only the ballot can stop the bullets.
Yes.
So today, as I speak with you, we realize that that country that we love so much, our motherland, dear Guyana, suffers from an essential ingredient that would take it forward. It suffers from the ingredient of unity, ethnic and national unity. And so when the original former leaders of Guyana, the deceased leaders of Guyana, decided that they were going to engineer what was called the split of the national movement in 1955, they didn't split a political movement. They split the country. They didn't separate races. They cut our heart in two. And so the leaders realized that the common solution to Guyana's many problems must be national unity. Shadi Jagan realized that, and in 1964, when he was the premier of Guyana, he reached out to his once co-leader and colleague Forbes Burnham and offered him to share the government 50-50. It didn't happen. Perhaps not because Burnham may not have wanted it. There were more powerful forces that didn't want it. The British and the American establishments, they didn't want the unity, because in our fragility, in our division, capital and investment would triumph, and we would be too weak to stand up as a nation to resist the exploitation and the export of our raw material our resources, our sugar, our timber, our bauxite. And all colonial powers all over the world behave the same way. And so it didn't happen in 1964, and we went into deeper problems, and we had the racial riots of the 60s. And then we came out about in the 70s, and even though there were many allegations that I wrote about and Chetty wrote about, that elections were fraudulent, the United States in particular did not mind that there was fraudulent elections once Jagan and the PPP were not the government. They played a critical role. If you read Arthur Sassinger's book, 1,000 Days in the White House, it is fully documented who fomented the riots, who paid for it, who actually engineered the division in Guyana. And so in 1975, 1976, 1977, knowing that the Cold War was on and that there was no way that the PPP would be permitted or Jagan would be permitted to form the government, Chetty Jagan offered critical support first to Burnham against the foreigners because they were the main #1 adversary. And two, he said there should be need for a national front and a national front government. It was Chetty Jagan who I followed all my adult life, all my life, who sent me secretly to talk to people associated with Burnham to find out if he wanted to talk. And I will do many meanderings, none of which you will ever see in writing. Blowing the ears, hanging a camera on my shoulder, going to the airport when a dignitary would arrive, finding a way to get close to Burnham, or get close to Laurie Lewis, or to the Secret Service, to tell them Chetty wants to talk. And therefore, when you see the first allegations made that elections were rigged in 1973, I believe that Jagan felt that the national interest was more important than perennially quarreling about rigged elections, because those are the things that divided us. And it didn't work. There was no national front, and there was no national front government. I recall that one of the authors of the program for the National Front government was the late Dr. Walter Rodney. We went to the Clerico House, headquarters of the CCWU, and I was asked by Chetty, and Walter was asked by the WPA for us to draft the first program for national unity. And as Walter and I were walking up the stairs of Clerico House, a little adjoining room, I asked him, I said, Walter, would there be a place for the PNC in this government of national unity? And he watched me, and he told me, why not? That if the PNC would commit itself to free and fair elections, there will always be a place in the government of national unity for the PNC. And it was he who described the PNC as an authentic party, mass-based party. And I remember when I did my university long paper, it was titled The Origins of the Mass-Based Parties in the West Indies. And the PNC and the PPP featured in my research as authentic mass-based parties. And therefore, when you came down, right down to the 1985, there was an attempt to form a government of national unity. We wrote the program. We assigned cabinet portfolio. Burnham was to remain president. Chetty Jagan was to be the prime minister. And I was working at the Mirror with Mrs. Jagan. And when it appeared as if we were going to sign the agreement for the secret talks that were taking place at Belfield, Janet Jagan wrote